Coming up next also, to round out the program of movements in new directions, I'm sorry, I should have mentioned that before, is we have Richard Katsuda. He is the co-founder of Nikkei for Civil Rights and Redress, which was formerly a National Coalition for Redress and Reparations during the struggle for redress during the 1980s. And he's also he's co-chair of that, as well as a co-founder. And he's also the co-founder of Campaign for Justice, which is a redress movement right now for Japanese Latin Americans. It's unfinished business, and let's welcome him right now. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Juliet. See, I'm a teacher, and as such, I feel a very deep responsibility for teaching what happened over 60 years ago to today's youth. What happened to Japanese American youth, what happened to Japanese American community as a whole, and what happened to our American democracy. And one thing is, just from what Frank Chen was just talking about, is that we're talking about 120,000 different stories, different lives that got torn up by what happened during World War II. Because sometimes we hear the numbers, go, oh, okay, 120,000 people, those people got locked up or whatever happened, and that's a tragedy and all of that. But I think what Frank wanted to bring to life is that there was a lot of turmoil in the camps, and a lot of that turmoil is stuff that's still with our community today, 60 years after the fact. And so that's part of the story of how this impacted not only Japanese American youth, but the whole community as a whole. And as a teacher, I'm here today with a group of teachers from Los Angeles Unified School District, a busload of 45 teachers, and we're here as part of a conference, an annual conference that's held to teach teachers about how best to teach our young people, our youth today, about what happened during World War II. And our work is really cut out for us because today, 2006, over 60 years after the fact, after the redress movement, after what we feel is a lot of education in our public about what happened, there was a survey done a few years ago which showed that only about a third of the American public knows what happened to Japanese Americans during World War II. That's a sad fact, of course, and that just shows that our work is indeed cut out for us. But during this time when I was talking to the teachers, I asked them if they knew about the story of what happened to Latin Americans of Japanese ancestry during World War II. And 2 of the 45 teachers raised their hands. And these are teachers who are generally more knowledgeable, aware of what the history of what's happened in our country. So before I start this little story, I want to ask you, how many of you out there know what happened to Japanese Latin Americans during World War II? Could you raise your hand? Okay, good. I mean, I know there are a lot of community members out there, a lot of people who are very knowledgeable what happened, but it is a fact that maybe 90 to 95% of the general public does not know this. And what it is that during World War II, during a time when the United States, at war with Japan, found out about American citizens who were caught behind enemy lines in Asia. And so they're trying to figure out, okay, we need a way to have kind of some hostage exchange to get our American citizens caught behind enemy lines to get them back to the United States. And so I guess they probably thought that it'd be too outrageous, too blatant to use Japanese American citizens to do that, because here again, I mean, a lot of the government officials were saying that the camps were for the protection of Japanese Americans. And so of course it would have been quite a contradiction to use Japanese Americans for this hostage exchange. And so what happened was that the United States turned to Latin America. 13 Latin American countries basically turned over, they kidnapped many of the Japanese American business leaders, community leaders, teachers and all, from these 13 Latin American countries, and with the leadership orchestrated by the US government, they took 2,264 Japanese Latin Americans, put them on ships, and brought them to the United States through the Panama Canal. And then when they finally arrived here, I believe in New Orleans, some of the Japanese Latin Americans told me let me just say that what happened was a lot of these countries were similar to the United States, where there was a lot of competition, feeling of competition with the Japanese in those countries, and a lot of the governments of those countries were very happy, willing to give up their Japanese for this hostage exchange program. And so when they came to the United States, when they first got off the ships, I hear stories from the Japanese Latin Americans who went through this very degrading experience. They talked about how they got off, they had them stripped, and then they sprayed DDT on them to, get rid of whatever. And so that's their welcome to the United States. And in transit to the United States, they became stateless people because their Latin American countries basically said, we don't want to have anything else to do with you. They were brought in basically illegally by our U.S. government.